Hello everybody, welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space, and thank you so much for joining us for the very first event of 2023. Today we are launching this here playbook, Makerspaces, for learning, living, and sharing. So pleased that you could join us in person or online. Just to help situate you, whether you're joining us in person or online, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. As caretakers for the lands and waters that we are meeting on today, we'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their teachings about the earth and our relations. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that invite Concordians together with external partners and audience members to examine research questions and projects in development here at the university and with our partners. So we're very pleased to welcome you to this event. Thank you to our colleague and research chair in Maker Culture, Anne-Louise Davidson, for bringing us all together. And Anne-Louise, I'll pass the floor to you now. Welcome.
Thank you, Anna. Welcome, everyone. I can see that everybody has been joining online with our usual or almost usual well-known crowd. This is probably the biggest maker event I've held face-to-face since 2020, since March 2020. I remember that the last Maker Jam we did, we were kind of worried that anybody in the room had COVID, and we kind of closed the event quite fast, and that was it. So I'm glad to find the maker community back again. I want to talk about this initiative and what we were trying to do and why it came to be and what the playbook is about today. So the idea of the project came to mind after the 2018 Maker Fair that we held here at Concordia. At the time, my team at the Milieu Institute organized this flagship event to unify the makers around Montreal. And we were following the footsteps of Danielle Dyson, who had created or organized 2 Maker Fairs previously on her own without much help. It's a lot of work. And at the time we said, we're only doing it once. We're not going to repeat this. So the event was a success, but we wanted to continue the momentum of what was happening. So at the time, we also noticed that there were a lot of makers in Quebec City and elsewhere in Quebec who wanted to be part of the maker ecosystem, to share practices, share ideas, ask questions, and they had less spaces outside of Montreal. They did share the ethos of making, the resourcefulness, the kindness also that we find in the communities of sharing, the curiosity and the inventivity that you find in Makerspaces. So in 2019, Nadia Nafi, who's in red actually right now, you can see her on screen, was hired at Université Laval as professor. And this gave us the opportunity to expand the network around the maker research elsewhere than in Montreal. So what we did is we had a lot of partnerships with schools, with CEGEPs, universities, libraries, community makerspaces, but less with museum makerspaces. So we knew that the Musée de la Civilisation had an amazing makerspace called the M-Lab Créaforme, and we thought that they were the point of entry for such partnerships. So we approached Anna Lorabaz at the time and her team to discuss the ambition to create unconference events. So that's sort of like an ed camp kind of event where people who are the participants actually create the event, co-construct knowledge. And what we wanted to do was to bring together all the makerspaces from all contexts. So initially we wanted to create a 4-day event. That was the big project, a 4-day event in Montreal and in Quebec. We even wanted to organize a bus to transport people to the Musée Pop in Trois-Rivières, to Musée de l'Inventivité, de l'Ingéniosité in Valcourt. And we wanted people to really connect and build strong collaboration, companionship, and so on and so forth. So by the time we obtained the partnership fund from SSHRC, the COVID pandemic forced us to shut down all the spaces, and we thought that this was going to be a 2-week thing. And I was looking at the news from Asia, and I was thinking, this is no way this is going to be a 2-week shutdown. So it ended up being 2 years, and we decided to change the design of the unconference events so that they could be online. So the solution was Nadia and I sat in her living room and we said, we really need to redesign these events and bring them online because we wanted on conference events. It could not be the traditional panel discussion and so on and so forth. We really wanted the people to create, to engage into co-construction. We wanted an emergent kind of series of events and let knowledge emerge from the groups. So we decided to conduct a study to give us the thematics that were the essential pieces that would give us the foundation for the event. So I'll hand it over to Nadia just to see her perspective on it and maybe a little bit of a narrative that happened behind the scenes as well. Nadia is in Beirut right now, so if ever there's a delay, that justifies the issue here.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to join you. Yeah, from Lebanon, it's 11 p.m. Here at my end. But as Anne-Louise said, this is an event that we've been waiting for a long time. And I'm super happy. I'm not going to talk a lot because I know that at some point, maybe the internet will shut down at my end. But I welcome you, everyone. And some of the stuff that really was amazing was the amazing people that join our conferences, right? Like the events. We had a lot of people. We had really very rich discussions. We were surprised at the end of each of the sessions, we end up, having another discussion, just talking about the rich and the amazing, participation that you had. And then working on the playbook was really all the ideas that emerged from these discussions. So, So Alois, back to you.
Actually, I'll hand it over to Natalie, who can talk about the study and the podcast. So Natalie basically was the director of the study we conducted pre-on conference. So over to you, Natalie.
Sure, thanks, Anne-Louise. So as Anne-Louise was saying, the maker community in Quebec is very, very vibrant. And we wanted to have these on conferences, but we really needed to narrow down the topics, or we could be here for months and months on end. So what we did was we interviewed a variety of people from different institutions in Quebec because we wanted to make sure we had that variety of perspectives. So we talked to people from places like schools and universities and colleges, but we also wanted to make sure that we talked to people from places like museums and libraries and community centers. So we ended up speaking to over 30 individuals who are leaders in this area and who know very well their particular domain. So that we could come up with topics that would be relevant to most people who would participate, but also that were salient at the time. And then we analyzed the data like we would with any study, and we had 6 topics that emerged as really salient and important to the community at this point. And those included, well, the first and obvious one was COVID adaptations, because, well, that was new for everybody. And a lot of the makerspaces had closed down. So they wanted to know, how do we keep our communities vibrant and active during a time like this, especially when making is such a concrete thing usually. Another topic that came up was networking among the makerspaces. Most of the people we spoke to expressed a desire to connect with each other, to share resources. Why reinvent the wheel when somebody's already done it? And then we had the community engagement and sustainability. A lot of makerspaces kind of start with a lot of hype and a lot of enthusiasm from people and offering support, but then these spaces kind of, how do they basically maintain that enthusiasm so that the space doesn't end up closing? Another topic was, how do we train facilitators? How do we prepare facilitators? They're very, very important, but we don't want them taking over projects. We also don't want them leaving people too much and then people get frustrated and give up. So how do we train facilitators to make sure that they're helping but not overwhelming the client or the maker? Another topic was making informal education. We know that making leads to a lot of learning, but it's not just a matter of going into a school and doing it. There's a lot of structure around schools and the education institution, and how do we get around that to make sure that it stays making and doesn't become just some kind of school subject. And then maker kits. There's a lot of debate about maker kits. Some people feel they're very important. Some people feel that it just fuels consumerism. So how do we work with kits in a way that doesn't, end up falling into the pitfalls of consumerism? And so what we did was to really emphasize that this was an unconference and that you weren't going to come and just listen to experts. You were actually coming to share your knowledge. We took excerpts from the various interviews that we had conducted, and we created short podcasts that we shared, and they're still available. And apparently that approach was very successful because we had quite a number of people attend, and people who were really engaged in the maker community. So, yeah.
All right, over to Jen. Jen will talk to us about the extraction of the data and the creation of the online, the design of the online event.
So we actually, we actually use an online collaborative tool called Miro. What is Miro? Because we were doing an online conference event and we really wanted people to work with us, it's an actual whiteboard. So we needed to create with the themes that we had, different types of whiteboards to conduct these conference events. I think I worked about a month or two on designing multiple iterations of the actual Miro board, and we worked actually collaboratively on what we really wanted, because we already had a lot of data collected, and we really wanted to dig deeper with the unconference to get actually more data for this playbook.
All right, over to Don.
So we're talking about the design of the playbook, right? Yeah, so I hope that everyone has got a chance to at least to look at their copy here and maybe flip through some of the pages. For those of you guys online, I believe we can. Is a link for the PDF has been available, right?
Ryu is here with us. She will talk about that a little bit later. But the PDF copy will be freely available on the Engage Learning website. And Martin, I'll give a chance to Martin to discuss it later.
Fantastic. So I just wanted to point out a few interesting features of the book, because in Maker Spirit, we really wanted to create a book that wasn't just a broadcast of information to the reader, but it's something that really encouraged folks to engage with the material and consider themselves and their own spaces in relationship to the material. So, for example, if you would turn to page 19 in your hymnals here, you see we've got worksheets. We ask questions. We've got spaces for you to fill out in response to the questions that are posed. And so instead of just putting that as a question and then asking you to reflect, we figured by making a space with lines where you're really encouraged to write, we're really inviting you to really examine your space and engage with this material and make this book your own. There's pages to do self-assessments, guided pages for assessment of your staff and ways to help them move forward. Because again, we wanted this to be a very useful book, even down to the spiral binding, which this makes it much easier to hold in your hands and carry around your space with you. The color coding of each individual chapter, so they're easier to find. And yeah, and if you go through the book, there's sections with lots of resource links scattered throughout, case studies as well. And so again, we're really hoping that this becomes a practical tool that you could use on a day-to-day basis with your space and your staff and your community to help it grow.
Great. I lost my notes. Event notes.
My turn.
Want to talk about the COVID adaptations?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say really congratulations, Don, for the amazing work you did on this playbook. The whole design and the whole mise en page and everything, it's really very practical. It's really amazing. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the first theme. So we know the pandemic was horrible in all sorts of ways, but its disruptive aspect made us learn many lessons, right? That change how we facilitate makerspaces and keep the communities active and engage. And that was exactly the first theme of our playbook, as Nathalie said. We shared lessons learned in the event that our makerspace is not physically accessible, but also practices we should maintain, sustain, and help evolve beyond the pandemic. We learned that we can actively engage in making through video conferencing, online workshops, tutorials, online simulations. And since for many projects, we really needed real things. We also learned that, makerspaces can facilitate equipment rentals and loans. Other strategies were relaying production, breaking projects into parts that each person can contribute to, one at a time, or simply going low-tech by using materials accessible at home and make the making continue. As Don said, in the playbook, you can find resources, and in this very specific theme, you can find resources for online workshops, tutorials, simulations, and also low-tech making. But regardless if you can access makerspaces physically or online, based on the discussion, it's important to keep the connection alive and flowing through activities, through collaborations. We also had examples of celebrations of small accomplishments, shared calendars, opportunities for virtual visits and tours, social meetups that even not necessarily about making, but just to keep the community alive. So the other thing was, it was important to always listen to the community and involve them in solutions. And we saw also that some of the practices were, continuing, such as we had the reservation systems, loaning kits, all the hybrid and co-modal activities, and also social and societal issues solutioning. So this is in a nutshell what we covered in the first theme. And I think now I'm going to hand this to Huda, who's going to discuss the second theme.
Thank you, Nadia. The second theme in the playbook was building a network. And as we know, makerspaces have the potential to collaborate and share resources within a network kind of collaboration. So the building a network section in the playbook highlights the benefits of joining such a network, where it allows makers from different makerspaces to exchange ideas, skills, expertise, maybe even inspiration from each other, get inspired by each other. It might give them access to resources or equipment that may not be otherwise available at their own local makerspace. Also, by forming partnerships across different makerspaces, it allows them to co-create on activities that one makerspace on its own might not be able to do, and to share best practices and lessons learned among each other. Specifically in this section in the playbook, it includes worksheets to help makerspaces brainstorm what they can offer to others in the network. This can include materials, tools, expert knowledge. It could also be community building strategies, what has worked in your own community to build that kind of network and attract people into the makerspace and bring makers together. It could even have access to local groups and organizations that are not specifically around making, but for example, an art studio that is your neighbor next to your makerspace that you have access to, which could be shared with others. By sharing what we have learned and the resources at our disposal, we can definitely strengthen and enrich the maker community as a whole and make it a better experience for the makers coming into the makerspaces. And I think now to the third theme with Natalie.
Geneviève.
I'm sorry.
So our third theme was preparing facilitators, and this particular theme helped me personally because I recently got hired as a facilitator at La Fabricathèque du Sud-Ouest. So what do you need to do? What do you need to be or do to become a facilitator? It's honestly a really good tool for current facilitators, but also for the HR or the hiring department, and what type of person you need to really run a proper makerspace. And you need a lot, to be fair. You need soft skills, social skills, technical skills. Even though the technical skills can be learned, it's still a lot to learn. But we really try to have it like a workbook for somebody who is hiring or even trying to develop themselves as a facilitator, and interpersonal skills, what type of skill, what is your assessment? And it really helps you develop your staff and yourself in creating a maker facilitator.
Thank you, Jen. Building community.
Yeah, so this is a topic that was really near and dear to my heart. How do we create these spaces that aren't just spaces full of resources and tools and people who know how to use those tools and can make cool things, but how do we create a community of people who support each other, who welcome new people while retaining people who have been there for a long time, and create a community that is increasingly invested in the success of that space. Because I think when maker spaces don't focus on that and they become just a very transactional in their engagement of individuals with the space, they, in my experience, they tend not to thrive. And so this section on building community addresses those questions of how do you get people into the space? How do you make people feel welcome? How do you increase the investment of those individuals in that space over time? We also had to consider the fact that every space is unique, and one space's answer might be very different from another. So one of the thing we started with in this section is what I call a score analysis, which is kind of like SWOT if you ever do business type things. But SCORE stands for strengths, constraints, opportunities, risks, and enthusiasms. All of those are pretty clear, except that enthusiasm, I think, is particularly important in a makerspace environment, because a makerspace community is going to thrive when it really acknowledges and focuses on the things that they're actually excited about. Because we often, as makerspaces, survive based on the free participation and the generosity of our community members. And so as I hope by pulling all of these things together with a workbook approach that allows us to reflect on our own unique qualities is going to help all of us to have successful, unique makerspace communities.
All right, and the fifth topic was looking at making informal education settings. Making in these settings has become more and more popular, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. But in most educational settings, we're dealing with a very fixed structure. And it can be challenging for teachers and administrators to integrate making into the classroom in a way that maintains the ethos and the spirit of making, but still addresses the requirements that are placed on their shoulders, like curriculum requirements, evaluation, and that kind of thing. For experienced teachers and experienced makers who are teachers as well, it's not as much of a challenge because they know how to work their way around that system. But for people who are new to making or who are new as teachers, this can be a challenge because they don't have that knowledge yet. So what we wanted to do with this section was to provide teachers and principals and leaders in education, as well as people from the community, with suggestions and tips from other people who are already in that system and know that system well, as to how to approach this. So for instance, for teachers, how do you get started? If you're intimidated by technology, if you're intimidated by making and the mess, how should you get started? How do you get support in the classroom to do that with 30 kids all at one time? Also, how do you address the curriculum requirements? How do you evaluate the making without killing the kids' motivation? Because often evaluation does kill kids' motivation, or at least stifles it a little bit. So how do you do that so that you can show evidence of learning, but at the same time keep that motivation there? In terms of principals, how do you create a culture of making in your school so that it doesn't become just some one-off activity or some thing that you do for a grade at the end of the semester, and these kids don't actually develop that maker mindset? Same thing for leaders in education. How do you provide the support, both monetary and also human support, in terms of making this happen in the schools? And then for parents and community members, how can you support the schools as well? Because it's not always down to just money. It also relies on having support from people who can offer their knowledge, because the teachers aren't the experts most of the time in each of these technologies. So if parents are an expert in a given area, how can they help out? So basically that was what that chapter was about, or that section was about, to help these teachers who are a little less familiar with these areas.
Kits. Kits is the last section, and they're so problematic because kits are very often a commercial method to get people into making. One of the dangers of kits is that they become very expensive. They're episodic, so it's one experience, and rich people or people who have the means to buy them, and they play with the kits with their kids on the weekend, and they become extremely problematic because they're not accessible to families that don't have the means to buy them, or they're purchased as series, and then they're part of one lesson, and then they stay in the closet. I don't know how many schools I've visited, and I've seen robots in the closet. So I think we need to decloset robots and leave them out. So the whole aspect of kits is highly problematic. The section on kits is to help people select kits or design their own kits. So the work I conducted under the research chair in maker culture, I found that kits were one of the most contentious issues. Do you buy an authentic Arduino kit with all the modules, or do you buy a clone? Do you buy something else? And everybody disagrees on kits. So beginner kits are simple to use. They're sometimes very essential, but if they only serve the elite or the elite schools or the elite families, it's really contrary to the democratic aspect of the maker movement. Some kits can be very useful. Others are more recipe-like, and they don't necessarily yield the proper learning outcomes. So what we try to do in that section is to try to provide some constructs to help people make decisions on kits. We also provided some steps to think about purchasing kits or making your own kits. Hubert Cousineau from the Musée de l'Ingéniosité had a very, very brilliant kit that could be mailed to classes. So he's sitting here in the room now. So if you want to take advantage of this session to ask him questions or maybe to connect with him, it's a very good idea to look at his kit. So it is featured as a case example in the playbook. So we really value the Montreal, Quebec area inventivity and the ingenuity that has been part of the reactions of makerspaces and people who have created their own kits. There's also Robot in a Can, which is also a Montreal invention created by Ben Dueck, who actually teaches in one of the schools in Montreal, the study, I believe. So the idea of the maker kits is really to try to debunk some of the myths around the idea of just buying expensive kits, which actually don't always solve the problems. So that's pretty much it for the structure of the playbook. What I want to tell you is that we didn't want just another book on creating your makerspace. You need $100,000 to create a makerspace. That's not true. You need to have resources. You need to have people with, I would say in French, un sens de la débrouillardise. So basically a sense of, how do you call that in English? Débrouillardise. I never found, maybe Christine can help me. Know-how. Being a maker, I mean, that's what I really mean. So the idea was to offer a book to the community that was actually co-created by the community of maker facilitators and makers themselves. So it's a group effort. It would have never happened without you online, without you here in the room, and without the team of students who actually put their heart into this project. Projects really happen when people are ready to support the projects, put their hearts in the project, feel as though they have ownership in the project. And one of the things that I must highlight is that Jen has actually surpassed herself in the creation of the mirror boards. Huda was who's online, was actually very helpful with all of the design of the online tools and the procedures in Miro. Natalie did a great job at directing the study, and without Dawn's capacity of design, it would have been very difficult to make a whole of all of the knowledge that has been spread throughout the events. And I'm just going to show you something really fast before I invite people to join in, but I'm going to share my screen and show you what the actual boards looked like. Here we go. Backup topic number 1. Here we go. So I'll share my screen here. So you have an idea. If you were not part of the unconference events, it's really hard to understand what we were doing exactly during these events, but it was because of the leaders that were part of this, the community that co-constructed the knowledge with us, and the rounds. So all the events happened on Zoom in breakout rooms, and then leaders actually visited groups and then participated. Let's say this is an example of one of the 3 discussions around COVID adaptations. So the section 1 was actually all the sections were created by the content that was actually shared online. So there were 3 conversations happening in Miro, and this was an example of the shift to online activities. So how well did you adapt to the shift to online or hybrid activities during the COVID shutdown? And there were 4 sub-questions. So what practices or activities still worked? And then people brainstorm. What practices of activities did not work? People brainstorm. Which emergent COVID practices or activities will you keep? And where can we innovate? So all of this is coming to saturation with the sharing of ideas of the community. So 7 events happened, of which 6 of the teams were actually usable to create the content of the playbook. And this is the reason why we were able to call it a real co-construction. So how do you wrap these conversations into a deliverable that will serve the community after that? So thank you, students, for your contributions. I'm going to invite people now who were the leaders of the conversations. I know that there's a lot online as well, so maybe we can alternate between online and in presence. So Christine, Chris, Alex, Mike. Is there anybody else that I forgot? I have my reading glasses, so I'm not really seeing who's at the back of the room. It's bright. And it's quite bright too. So yeah, there's one more seat. So the second part of this event is really to share either practices, input, reactions, stories, projects, events. So maybe we can start with Chris. So I'll give you a microphone.
Well, it was really fun to be a part of this, first off. I mean, the play looks amazing. The pandemic changed a lot of things. And we tried to look at the bright side of, because it was just really daunting on us as educators when we are all back online. And it pushed us to kind of think outside the box, which really came at the great time when we had to kind of start to reflect on how are we going to keep this momentum going. And we tried stuff. You know, we weren't afraid to screw up, you know, to feel like we're wasting time, to feel like we don't know what we're doing. It was kind of like learning to walk again. And I think that through that experience, I think that the community's gotten stronger. And I think the idea of giving kids more of, well, maybe not just kids, but I see it from a kid's perspective, a student perspective, of giving them more space in their learning and getting out of their way a little bit more. Because when they're right in front of us, we tend to control as opposed to kind of letting them finding a way. But it always, you know, it's been interesting. I've really liked the experiences online making with kids. I found that was a highlight of with COVID, where I would tell the kids, I want you to find 5 things in your recycling bin. I'm going to give you a theme. We're going to make something together. And being on Zoom like this and being able to create that engagement factor. Mm-hmm. So that was a big, that we could still do this even if we're all like a million miles apart.
So this is Chris Goldie from Learn Quebec, in case some people don't know him. Maybe as a nice segue into this conversation, I can hand it over to Julie Durand, who it was also at a college, at a private college at the time of the pandemic, and maybe Serge Baudouin at the same time can collaborate in that discussion with Julie's interaction. They're both online.
Hi. Yes, hi. Because I'm going to present with Serge, we did not speak before, but I'll speak in French. Is that okay?
Oui, ça va.
Okay. Pas de problème. Donc, juste pour partager l'expérience que pour moi, c'était une expérience d'apprentissage au même niveau que là, vous nous présentez comme étant les facilitateurs, mais on est aussi des apprentis dans un processus qui, pour moi, était justement un processus de maker qui s'est fait au fur et à mesure. J'ai l'impression, je ne savais pas vraiment dans quoi on s'embarquait au début. On a contacté, on a démarré nous-mêmes un laboratoire créatif, une nouvelle collaboration qui s'est développée avec Geneviève. Puis, on a appris au fur et à mesure. Donc, j'ai l'impression que le processus Maker s'est intégré dans tout ça. Puis, on a créé au fur et à mesure un résultat qui n'était pas clair au début, puis qui s'est avéré très enrichissant au fur et à mesure. Donc, merci pour cette expérience enrichissante de ma part.
Merci, Julie. Julie Durand, qui était au Collège Saint-Sacrement durant la pandémie et qui maintenant travaille pour... Julie, peux-tu nous rappeler pour qui tu travailles maintenant?
Oui, maintenant, je travaille pour FADIO. Donc, FADIO, c'est la formation à distance interordre dans l'Est du Québec, Bas-Saint-Laurent, Gaspésie et de la Madeleine. Donc, je travaille à distance avec eux. On est encore dans le développement de pratiques éducatives innovantes. Donc, certainement que les apprentissages faits dans notre collaboration seront utiles dans mon nouveau défi.
Merci, Julie. Serge, je te laisse la parole.
Oui, bonjour. Je vais continuer en disant, ben, moi aussi, c'est tout nouveau. À l'école ici, je suis au Collège Saint-Sacrement présentement, dans le Media Lab, puis à côté du Makerspace. En gros, ce que j'ai appris dans les derniers mois, c'est qu'il fallait aller à un rythme, mais plutôt au rythme de chacun. Le rythme de chacun, c'est important de le respecter, autant pour ceux qui veulent aller plus rapidement que pour ceux qui veulent prendre un peu plus le temps de penser, d'analyser et de faire à leur façon. Euh, on dit qu'il faut être curieux dans un maker, puis dans des projets comme ça nous amène à penser, mais je pense qu'il faut être curieux surtout quand ça va pas bien. Surtout quand il y a des problèmes, il faut commencer à être curieux parce que c'est souvent là que ça devient le plus intéressant. Et puis, c'est ça, rapidement, là, ma contribution, vous allez le voir dans le document, là, mais c'était un projet avec les écoles primaires, avec Geneviève Lamarche, et puis Gilles Durand, les écoles primaires, les écoles secondaires l'université. Puis c'était l'objectif de faire un projet de lampe de poche disons, qui était commencé par les plus jeunes, c'était surprenant, qui était poursuivi par nos élèves au secondaire, et puis avec l'aide de Geneviève, ben, qui était complété, ou disons, qui était amené un peu plus loin.
Merci, Serge. Maybe, Christine, I can hand it over to you since we're sort of like in the education.
Yeah. One of the things that we learned is, again, like Chris said, we had to reinvent ourselves, and we have a new space that we ended up moving into and redesigning last year. So now we're starting over in a way. So as part of that rebirth, a project that we have that we want to share, we had some success with Scratch meetups that were face-to-face. So Scratch is a platform developed by MIT for coding and programming. And before the pandemic, we had started doing some sessions live. And then we had to flip and meet with the people who were running it through Harvard. And they run a meetup group online to facilitate the groups that are meeting across the world. So we have created a meetup group for Quebec makerspaces and makers. So we're basically launching that today and inviting people if you want to be a part of it. I think, Anne-Louise, you had started a great list for us to get together, and then we wanted to start some momentum going on with that. So we're going to try to have 1 or 2 events this year and allow makerspaces in Quebec to showcase what they're doing, but also to continue the conversation, and probably in an informal, non-research way necessarily that's voluntary and informal, but we think it was really fruitful for us to have discussions with other leaders and people who are running the spaces. So we'll share the link with you for that group if you want to join. Anybody is welcome.
I'll give you my computer so that you can post it
okay.
on the Zoom.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hand it over maybe to Marc-André Girard, who's online, I believe. I saw him a little bit earlier on.
Salut.
Salut Marc-André.
Right here. You wanted to me to share the experience?
So either the experience or maybe your projects. I know that you started Fab Lab, La Fabrique Beaubois at the time, and then you became a principal in another school where there were no possibilities of creating a makerspace, and now you're a principal of another school, and I don't know what the projects are, but maybe you could talk about your leadership and your impressions.
But quite frankly, we have another project here in La Chute with the city and the MRC. I don't know what the MRC is in English. It's like the municipal authorities gathering many cities around in the neighborhood. But we are not really well advanced on the project, but we would like to have some kind of a partnership with different businesses from the area to see if they would be willing to help us and either fund a makerspace or provide some room to host one with under the leadership of the city and the MRC, but for our students as well, because here at the school we are having an increase of students, which is the case in many schools here in Quebec, but also we don't have bigger rooms yet, so we got to deal with this. But if to talk about my experience in the past on, I would say helping putting together a makerspace, I didn't know anything about that back in 2016 when we implemented the makerspace where I was working before, and everyone thought it was a good idea, and they looked at me and said, "Fine, you're gonna take care of this." And I was a little afraid because I didn't know anything about it. At the time, I thought we had to be an expert to be able to implement a makerspace, but the experience told me that there are as many makerspaces as there are many institutions hosting them. So I was lucky enough to gather a bunch of people who had that expertise and to and to get the best of all those people to put all together to create one very, very nice, and we wanted something big as well. We wanted the kids to have enough room. It was in a school setting. We wanted the kids to have enough room to work on all fours with robots out of the closet if possible. So we had to free the robots. And we wanted them to have enough room to work on all fours, but also on both of their feet, standing or sitting, so them to choose their posture when they're working. We also wanted to gather input from users. I thought it was very important, and to see how students, what they need and how they would be able to maximize. We're talking about $100,000 for Makerspace and Louise. But, money is one thing, but also you don't want to spend the money, which is rather rare in schools. You don't want to spend the money and then for a nice place where nobody's using it. We call that in French un éléphant blanc, a white elephant. I don't know if it's an expression in English, but anyhow. So we work with students, we work with parents, we work with teachers in order to have the best makerspace that suits their needs. Julie said it, we are co-learners, Serge said it as well. So we learn by doing, and we wanted the kids to learn by doing. So this is exactly what we wanted to do. And finally, one more thing, I maybe with some distance, 6 or 7 years later, it was a complex endeavor, I would say, and we learn from complexity as well. And sometimes in school, I would say, complexity is, we want to make things easy instead of embracing complexity. And I think makerspaces are labs that are able to help us cope and deal with complexity with collaboration and with different tools that we don't necessarily use or teach how to use in schools. So basically, that was my grain of salt.
Thank you, Marc-André. And Marc-André is the director right now, principal of the Polyvalente La Vigne in La Chute. So this is also the city of the best poutine in Quebec. If ever you want to go visit, Patate La Belle is the best place for poutine. I had to put that in. So maybe we can hand it over to Serge Gagné, who's at l'Académie Sainte-Thérèse.
Bonjour. Donc ici, notre expérience en tant que milieu d'abord primaire où on a implanté un Fab Lab, un petit peu comme Marc-André le disait précédemment, moi, j'avais pas d'expérience. En fait, j'avais très peu de connaissances. J'avais eu la chance d'aller voir justement comment Marc-André avait commencé son Fab Lab à l'époque à Beaubois. Mais comme nous, on désirait faire un Fab Lab dans un milieu primaire avant le secondaire, donc pour pousser nos élèves finalement pour faire des créateurs à partir du préscolaire jusqu'à la fin du secondaire. Donc, on n'avait pas du tout on n'avait pas du tout d'expérience en ce sens-là, mais c'est vraiment, j'aime beaucoup l'expression facilitateur. Je trouve que ça décrit vraiment bien l'essence de ce que je fais, puis ce que moi et mes collègues, parce qu'on est quelques-uns, là, justement, à faciliter le passage ici de nos collègues enseignantes et enseignants du primaire pour fabriquer, pour programmer, pour créer des solutions concrètes à des problèmes qu'on propose aux élèves. Donc, que ce soit de fabriquer un objet, que ce soit de fabriquer un robot, que ce soit d'inventer une nouvelle approche pour une problématique environnementale. C'est toutes des choses devant lesquelles on met nos élèves et qui font en sorte que on avance progressivement. Lorsque j'ai eu la chance de m'entretenir avec Nathalie du Panzo, je pense, il y avait été question justement des parents qui jouent un rôle important. Puis moi, avant la COVID, parce qu'il y a eu le avant, puis le pendant et le après, là, mais avant la COVID, c'est vraiment un élément que j'utilisais beaucoup, c'est-à-dire l'expertise des gens autour, que ce soit des parents, que ce soit notre technicien ici qui a vraiment tout plein de connaissances qui ont pu nous aider. Donc, des parents aussi bons en robotique qui sont venus donner un coup de main. Je pense que l'environnement d'un Fab Lab, d'un Makerspace, c'est vraiment un environnement qui met ensemble tout plein d'acteurs. C'est ça qui fait que c'est un environnement qui est riche puis qui permet de développer tout plein de solutions puis de trouver aussi autour de nous des gens qui, pas nécessairement pour leur titre, qui soient enseignants, qui soient techniciens, qui soient concierges, on s'en fout. Ce sont des gens qui ont peut-être des habiletés quelconques, des passe-temps, donc toutes sortes de ressources qui peuvent nous aider et ça, ça nous permet d'avancer. C'est certain que pendant la pandémie, on a été plutôt discret là-dessus. Puis au début de la pandémie, on fabriquait des visières avec nos imprimantes 3D puis notre découpe laser. Mais c'est à travers les vidéos que j'envoyais aux élèves puis des projets qu'on faisait à distance qu'on a réussi finalement à continuer des projets, mais d'une façon autre, avec très peu de technologie, bien sûr, avec les moyens qui disposaient à la maison. Maintenant, on en est ailleurs, dans le sens où est-ce que là, on est à se re-questionner jusqu'à quel point on va faire intervenir des gens dans notre milieu. Puis là, comme les consignes sanitaires sont bonnes, on est allé, j'ai recommencé à introduire des parents qui voulaient nous appuyer, qui voulaient nous aider. Puis ça l'a toujours, comme dans n'importe quel projet, plus on met de main à la pâte, plus on arrive avec des solutions, puis c'est très, très, très formateur du point de vue des élèves. Donc, si je regarde le début du projet, nous, on a commencé en 2017 jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Notre Makerspace a beaucoup évolué, mais aussi notre vision de ce que c'est, puis la façon dont on l'a présenté aux membres du personnel, aux enfants au tout début, et aujourd'hui, comment on le présente. Je pense qu'on saisit beaucoup mieux, on est beaucoup plus à même de voir les portées de ce qu'on fait, puis de voir ce qu'on peut faire réaliser aux élèves aussi. Donc, c'est vraiment, en même temps qu'au début, c'était quelque chose vraiment à créer, qu'on ne savait pas trop où on s'en allait. Aujourd'hui, on ne voit pas comment on ferait les choses autrement. Je pense entre autres à un camping de Noël qu'on fait à chaque année où on passe la nuit au Fab Lab. Je pense à différentes activités de formation qu'on fait aussi bien à l'externe qu'à l'interne pour montrer des types de projets qu'on peut faire. Donc, on commence à voir vraiment la portée très grande que peut avoir ce milieu-là, ne serait-ce qu'en tirant profit de toutes ces compétences-là que nos élèves ont et que les gens qui gravitent autour de nous ont.
Merci Serge pour l'intervention. Mike, did you want to go ahead?
I'm Mike Deutsch, and at the time we did these series of unconference sessions, I was at Kids Co Jeunesse. I'm still at Kids Co Jeunesse, only now we have a different name. We go by Digital Moment, so you'll see that in the guide. I want to say, first of all, what a great opportunity this was to meet new people. I think you've done a wonderful job creating a community, many of whom already knew each other, some of us up here and in the room, but many of whom I met for the first time and immediately had things to talk about, and that was really, really wonderful. There was a nice spirit. I've spoken to some of you directly afterwards. Some of you I haven't yet, but you're on my list, so expect to hear from me, particularly in schools and museums that were not in my network, and my organization's network is a really great opportunity. So at Digital Moment, Kids Code Jeunesse, we're in one corner of the world of making. We really teach coding, artificial intelligence and related things, but really coding is where we started. And coding is a key part, but just a part of the maker world. So what I was able to contribute and what I learned the most about was some of the things that were in common between the world that I know in teaching coding, facilitating coding, and in training coding educators, and in that same parallel idea in the world of making. So I've got a few notes here. I'm going to tick through the things that I thought were in common, and some of the things that were new to me that really earned my respect from the people I was working with here. For one thing, in the coding world, at least in my organization and people we're really friends with, we are also skeptical of kits. There are many follow the steps and complete this project type of activities in the world of coding, K-12 coding. And I think we agree with most of this group that there's a place for those, but it's a limited place, and you must be able to expand beyond that if you hope to reach the learning goals and the values and the identity growth that we say we want for our students. Second, we share your pain. For a person who loves coding or who loves making, it can sometimes be surprising that not everybody loves this, and it can be difficult to wedge it into the K-12 world or into the world of libraries and museums and other places. I learned a lot of the strategies that this community has come up with to create and sustain that kind of enthusiasm. When it comes to facilitation and training facilitators, there are some aspects that are in common, things that we look for in the profile of a coding educator that are similar to maker educators. We look for people who can put their ego and their own expertise to the side and position themselves as a co-learner, a co-explorer. That was really nice to see validated in this group. Of course, you need flexibility. You need to be willing and able to acquire new tools and techniques as they evolve. That is just the same when you're dealing with low tech, things like cardboard and Lego that feel easy to master but can get very rich, as it is in coding. We start with unplugged activities. We start with acting out what instructions are. But of course, we go deeper and deeper from there. So some things that I hadn't thought of, but I definitely admire in maker facilitators are understanding the need to have a workflow in your space. How you govern, how you facilitate a workshop from start to middle to finish, and not always ending up in the same place. I think one of the downsides of coding education as we see it is that often everyone is meant to end in the same place. So boy, do I admire maker educators who know from the very beginning we are going to end up in very different places at the end. That calls for a whole new set of skills that I don't think I appreciated, but it's been really nice to learn that from this group here. Another one that came up in week 3, where I was one of the facilitators, on the Miro board, the groups mapped out a 2x2 matrix of different project ideas that they had seen or they had done. They went from simple to complex along one axis, and from small group to large group on the other axis. I had not considered in the world of coding what it might look like to have an activity with 30 people building the same thing together. I don't know that that exists. It does in the software world, among adults, among practitioners in the field. But wow, that got me thinking, what might that look like to do a collaborative coding activity with a group? So that was really nice, and thank you again.
Thank you, Mike. So maybe I'll hand it over to someone online now. Joel, do you have we'll have to be concise because we're running out of time. But if Joel is there, maybe we can give him a minute. Joel is not there. He was at another event at the same time. Okay, so maybe we can go over to Alec, who's in presence, and then I'll hand it over to Normand, who's online.
Thank you. Thank you for putting this together. It really was I'm echoing everyone's sentiments here. It was really fantastic to be involved in this. And I think the big takeaway for me was that I'm not alone, you know, and you get locked into your spaces, dealing with the issues that you have in your particular environment, not realizing, well, you know, other people have had similar or, you know, other didactic challenges that you are experiencing in your own, you know, space. So to sort of spread that open and make it, to be involved in that was really fantastic. And I think the big takeaway for me was just to reflect a bit on the element of time as being one of the key factors in all of the issues that I face setting up a Fab Lab or Makerspace experience in a school. I kind of equate it to like trying to camp in the rain and you're starting a fire and it's raining and you got to triage how you're going to start that fire because it so easily can go out. And you think about that with individual students. So just imagine for a second you got a classroom of 20 kids who are really excited to be in this really cool glitzy space that you've set up. And you're going to start playing with cardboard because you know that's an easy entry point. Imagine if the scissors didn't work, right? Or if the scissors were complicated, you didn't understand the interface. So I'm really interested in that interaction space with the tools. And so in exploring that, I'm very, you know, we started as a Fab Lab, so that's, for us, digital fabrication is a big part of our workflow. And the important part there is that kids and teachers interface and interact with the tools. And that can be very challenging when you have 20 students and you go through the activity and then all of a sudden you've got like, it's like some sort of internal pandemic where people are confused and you got 1,000 hands and you're trying to explain, no, it's 3 before me, ask the person next to you. So you're trying to create this interactive environment. So I'm just gonna end on this, is that one of the things that I see a lot is that creates a lot of uncomfort in the facilitator, and facilitators will go and they'll control the computer. That happens, and that's because of a stress issue of time, and there's reasons for that are immediate. So my favorite tool, and this is recently, is a straw, and I keep it in my pocket. If I don't have it, I start to get anxious because I'll be working with a student at a computer, and I'll be like, okay, that's what you need to do, and I make sure that they're interacting with the computer. And so now I've even put like a little tip on it so that this is like for vector drawing. So I can say, okay, use this tool, and I flip it around, it's a different tool. And just to get them to think about that, and I make it playful. When we're doing makey, I do a big circle, and I say, okay, we're going to create a connection here, and we just have a big sort of everyone clap hands and see if we can create a rhythm, just to break the ice, but to sort of make the interactive experience more, more feasible, and in essence of that time, make it fun for them in that moment, so they want to keep moving on.
It's a good tip. An excellent tip. I'll hand it over to Martine Rioux, who's online and who has a big announcement to make, which I kind of sort of spoiled I gave a spoiler a little bit earlier on, but over to you, Martine.
Yes, thank you. I will speak bilingual, I think.
No
So it's a pleasure for École Branchée, Engaged Learning to be the place where you can find the digital version of the playbook. I already shared the link on the chat. For those, I can put it again. Je le remets à l'instant. Donc, le texte est en français. Il y a le texte en anglais qui suit. À l'École Branchée, on est un média d'information en éducation, le plus grand média d'information au Québec pour les enseignants, pour amener les enseignants à adopter encore plus la technologie pour découvrir de nouvelles façons de faire. Et on n'a pas participé à tout le processus là, des on-conference, mais on trouvait très important d'être là comme diffuseur du playbook à la fin du processus pour qu'il soit diffusé le plus largement possible dans la communauté enseignante, dans les écoles au Québec, autant en français qu'en anglais, car il y aura une version, aussi en français qui s'en vient. Donc, pour l'instant, nos lecteurs vont pouvoir profiter de la version en anglais et on espère que ça va circuler très largement.
Merci, Martine. Alors, on est très fiers de collaborer avec l'école branchée. This is a collaboration that is really relevant for us because the playbook is available for free. That's why we only have a limited amount of copies printed. The playbook has been sent to a translator, and that's thanks to Normand Roy from the Gryptique, who's a professor also at Université de Montréal, who found the funds for us to translate the book in French. Given that the team was Anglophone, given that most of the unconference events happened in English, the English version came first, but the French version will be revealed in May during the ACFAS, l'Association canadienne-française pour l'avancement du savoir. So stay put, because then we will put also we will have a limited number of copies printed, and we will also have the link available on the page of l'École branchée. So I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to say. The last thing I want to say is there's a theme that is ongoing, and it's the idea of you can be wrong, you can fail, you have to take risks. And what Alec was just saying in terms of not controlling, this is our biggest issue, is that we want students to be successful, but we also want us to be successful. We want our learners to be successful, and our best measure of evaluating our teaching is to make sure that they are successful. And when they fail, we don't feel very comfortable. And this is the whole idea of the maker ethos in school, is that the real people who really need to learn to take risks, to find solutions, to be creative, to try, to be iterative, to stick with the trouble, because it's the biggest thing is to give up when something is too hard. Nowadays, it's instant gratification. If I can't succeed, then that means I'm no good. So learning to stick with the trouble, being collaborative, creative, expanding the network, reaching out to people and so on, is fundamentally part of the ethos of making that we need to bring back into schools. It exists in communities. It's not always easy to keep going. But the idea of having people who are facilitating making, who are capable of tolerating their own non-knowledge, and I don't want to say incompetency because that's not really what it is, their own weaknesses and their own fears of failing is basically what facilitators need to handle. So hopefully the playbook will be an inspiration, will be helpful. We also have a community of people who are continuing the events. I will post a series of events on the Education Makers website, so if you want to know what that is, educationmakers.ca is where all the activities of the Research Chair in Maker Culture are posted. So what Christine mentioned and a few other events will be posted there to keep the activities going. So thank you so much for your participation today and for your participation in the unconference events. It was a great way to finish, to start 2023 and to finish the playbook experience. Thank you so much. Over to you, Anna.
Yay, round of applause, everybody. Well, congratulations to all involved and all who participated in the unconference. And thank you, Anne-Louise, for ending on such an inspirational note to us all. Some good advice for everyone to keep in mind through any kind of journey that we're on in our lives. So thanks for that. Okay, folks are on Zoom. We're going to close up now. Thank you so much for being in that space with us. Have a great evening. See you next time. And folks in the space, you're welcome to hang out, but we are closing at 6 p.m. So you have an hour to chill. Bye, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Bravo.